trees around you. And thinking about you all there in your idyllic forest, as I was preparing this talk, made me think of an idyllic forest, which you can see here. It's the Catskill Mountains in upstate New York. I was born in a valley near there and grew up near there, so I have an emotional connection to the forest and the mountain. My grandparents were immigrants to the United States, and they lived in New York City, but they didn't want to raise their children in the city, so they bought an old falling down farmhouse, which you can see here, to go for weekends and in the summer. That's my mother and her younger sister that you can see playing there and in their wash tubs in the ponds. My grandmother is standing up and watching. My little brothers and I, my older brothers and I, actually there are 5 of us, also spent time at that house with my grandmother and my aunt and my cousins. And here you can see, this is us, minus the smallest brother. Color photography had started at this point, so it's a little more recent. We used to spend summers there and had very warm memories of climbing mountains, watching wildlife, building tree forts, that sort of thing. Here you can see us preparing to set off on a hike in the woods. We're carrying our lunch bags with us, as you can see. Such warm memories. But my grandparents passed away, and family members stopped going to the house, which in that region is called a camp. You see the connection with your camp and your forest. That camp is a rustic house where you go for vacation. So the house began to fall into disrepair. And finally, there were animals living in it. It was sliding off the slope. It was not in good condition. And about 10 years ago, my brothers and I, now adults, decided to rebuild the house as a family meeting place, as a family camp. So this rebuild of the house, which we no longer live in the region, right? So we would just go occasionally there, was a huge project for us. We cared about it. As you can see, we had our childhood memories there, and we wanted it to be very beautiful. But we were terrible project managers. We made such poor purchasing decisions. For example, each of us knew something about what we wanted the house to look like. One of my brothers has built his own house. My dad built the house that we grew up in. My other brothers have built cabins, and I'm very practical with my hands. So we knew kind of what we wanted. We had an idea of some things, but we argued endlessly about what it should look like and about the actual purchasing decisions. We also needed specialist solutions in our little place, our little valley in the mountains. We weren't on the grid. We had no electricity, no solar panels. Our water comes from a spring, and a tree had fallen and uprooted the spring, so we needed work on the water. There were quite a number of specialist situations related to our cabin, our camp, and the local labor pool in the valley was very small. More poor purchasing decisions, my brothers and I, assumed that the service providers we hired were skilled, that Bob the carpenter actually knew about carpentry, that Lou the plumber actually knew about plumbing. We trusted their judgment. I don't know if you can see where I'm going with this. In any case, we lacked a big picture, except for our warm memories of the cabin and what we kind of wanted it to look like. And when we received quotes from local suppliers, everything seemed expensive. And in our sibling squabbling, we very often opted for the lowest bidder. This was partly because I think, to some extent, we thought, carpentry, we can do that. Electricity, we can do a little bit of that. So we always found the professionals more expensive than we should have. Lastly, we weren't on site, so we couldn't really track the progress. We would show up occasionally to do some of the work we could do, and we would see what the service providers had done, right? Those kinds of decisions, buying services in those conditions, was really not ideal, and it led to a lot of frustration. In fact, I can fairly say that things only improved once we'd been burned several times. And this is not burn as in forest fires, although that is an issue there, right? Burning here, it means that we had faced a risk and the supplier had catastrophically failed us. For example, Lou the plumber ended up destroying our spring and creating a swamp around the area where our water was supposed to come from. That attracted animals who pooped in the water, which contaminated the water that came into the house. That was a serious mistake on Lou's part. And we were obviously very upset about that. But things did improve after that kind of really bad situation when my brothers and I started choosing more skilled, more expensive vendors. And we had more interactions with the vendors who explained how they were going to do things, who was going to do what they expected from us, how they would work, and why they were doing things the way they were doing it. We, on our end, as self-confident and squabbling sibling buyers services, we learned to ask better, more focused questions and to get more involved in the process. So my story about the forest and our camp, and you're in the forest and the camp and so on. What is the link to translation? Well, for me, it's simple, relatively simple. We as translators are vendors. And if we're too immersed in our side of the transaction, that is what we're selling, we can lose touch with the purchasers. So what if we put ourselves in the shoes of the buyers? What does that mean in terms of developing empathy and becoming better vendors and making our clients into better clients? So that's what I'd like to talk to you about. I've been working in translation for about 40 years. I enjoy it. It's the best profession in the world, et cetera, et cetera. And I wanted to share with you briefly what I've learned in those 40 years. I should also specify that I'm talking about translation as a human talent industry, not a scalable commoditization industry. I'm absolutely aware that the scalable commoditizing happens and it's a part of the market, but it's only part of the market, okay? So I'm talking about the side of the industry where human talent is at a premium, okay? So here's what I've learned. I've learned that, like my brothers in our camp, good clients care about their projects. They really do. Often, they can't judge what they're getting, and that is the specific part of translation that unscrupulous suppliers can exploit, right? I like to think that my translations from French into English are absolutely incredible. Of course they are, right? But I know that my French clients, although they can understand the meaning, are not able to fully appreciate the stylistic flair that I bring to the job. And that is just part of the job, okay? That's just how it works. And the result of that is, I think we, as translators, have a duty of care to our clients, right? We can't just sell them any old thing. I also am convinced that ignorance is not the same thing as stupidity, right? My brothers and I were ignorant about rebuilding our camp, but I don't think we were stupid. We just didn't know. There were things we didn't know. And that's a reminder to me that good clients ask questions. We should be encouraging them, right? Good translators ask questions too. I also think that if we recognize, I think, within our circles that many clients are ignorant about the process and about the product and the service and so on, we acknowledge that. But if we exploit that, the client in ignorance, we're not actually following a sustainable business model. Well, not if you're in it for the long term. And as I said, I'm a professional translator, right? So that's my job. That's what I do. I'm not a translator who's translating while writing my novel or having a good time while waiting for a millionaire to marry or something like that, okay? My job is translation. A good part of my life is translation, and I really enjoy it, okay? Something that Nigel Sage has said before, good to remember that not all clients are good and not all are bad. But if you actually are a good translator, a human talent translator, I think it makes sense to aim for the good clients, right? And leave the bad clients to one side. They're out there, that's fine, but you don't have to look at them, all right? And I also think, and this is kind of sums up the philosophy here, if you're serious about translation, smarter and more demanding clients are exactly what you want. So the question then becomes, and for those people who know me, I'm always very practical. When I say that's the American side, I guess, right? To connect with clients, to connect with good clients, you have to get out of the translator land, translators talking amongst themselves. I mean, I think campus is great, and I hope we're talking to the people next to you. But when you're working on developing a professional portfolio of clients, you have to get out into the client space. And my experience is that translators in every country I've been in are much more comfortable with their peers, even if we squabble and fight together, right, than they are in getting out of that comfort zone into the place where clients are. So I want to leave you with a few suggestions on how you might do that. And I'm happy to take questions at the end or this evening. Legislation and I are having a session where we're dealing with questions, okay? So suggestion number one, I think it's high time that more translators became clients. That is, you take something you've written that's important to you, and you hire translators, several, to translate it. You observe yourself as a buyer. You observe your reactions to the quality of the text you receive. Now, the text can be, I say, anything that you're emotionally connected to, if you like. A letter to your parents, maybe your website, right? It should be something that means something to you, because that is the posture, for me, of the good client. They actually care about what they're getting, right? I think you should watch your vendor, your buyer behavior, and see how your reactions to what you're buying might change the way you interact with your own clients. Some people will know that I regularly conduct mystery shopper experiments, not every year, but every 3 or 4 years. I'll take a short text, a couple of short texts. They should be short because you don't want to invest too big a budget. And I've thrown up 4 or 5 or 6 suppliers and order that text from these vendors of translation, right? I say it's for a very demanding client. I insist that it be the very best quality. I ask for the supplier's deadlines and their price, and I accept that. I don't haggle. I don't try to beat them down on price. And that, for me, has been absolutely eye-opening to see how vendors, my competitors, I guess, to some extent, deal with clients, how they interact, how they talk, the excuses they give. You probably can't see this from where you're sitting, but you can look at the replay afterwards. And this is the way I set up my experiment when I'm discussing the results. I put the French. I work from French to English in column 1. In column 2, you have DeBell, which is free and instantaneous. In that's column 2. Column 3 is a translator, one of the translators I was mystery shopping. And then you have, usually I use text that I have worked on, actually. So column 4 is a text that my colleague Lillian and I produced. The same text, different translations. And I invite you to look at the differences in quality. When I started doing mystery shopping long ago, the results were hopeless. I was appalled by what translators were delivering, right? Translation companies and translators. More recently, they've got better, partly because translators do ask questions when they don't understand something. But you can see here, if you look at it, the quality of the text is very, very different. I've also had, and again, I won't go through the slide, you can look at it later if you're interested. I've also had the most amazing discussions where when a poor translation is delivered to me, I very politely point that out to the supplier. And I have received excuses for the poor quality that are absolutely hair-raising, right? When the text was manifestly poorly translated, the client, the vendor, has said to me things like, well, we're ISO certified. And I say, yes, but look at the text is not good. Well, we've been in business for 18 years. Yeah, but the text is not good. Our statistics show that 95% of our clients are happy with the work. Yes, but the text is not good, etc. Hearing fellow translators or fellow translation companies using those excuses is a reminder of the frustration that good clients can feel. And that's why I recommend it as a method for getting out of our heads into client heads. Second, and I'm sorry I have far too much content, so I hope we'll get to a point where we can ask questions. But if you're looking for good clients, I urge you to think of situations you yourself wouldn't try to drive the thing down on price or complain or haggle, where you would really want the very best. Now, a good indication would be texts that have an implication for life and death, for personal injury of you and people you love, right? How about texts that have a serious impact on your reputation or on the business or on the business of people you love? Those are the kind of texts that good clients will be very engaged with and that good clients are prepared to pay actually very good money for, right? And where you as a good translator can really dig in and do a good job, okay? Those are the clients and projects you want if you're looking for good clients. So where do these clients congregate? That's the question, because in fact, it's not just, you sitting in the forest and me sitting in my office saying, yeah, it'd be nice to get some good clients there, right? You have to do the work. You have to analyze the industry, find out where these clients meet up, go there virtually or in person, observe them and interact with them. I want to give you just 2 examples of how I've done that in the past, because I think, obviously you're working in other language combinations in another context, but I think that these types of examples exist in all language combinations. I work a lot with the French railways, the national rail company in France. I do mostly investor relations and corporate communications for them, but there's a technical component to it. And there are, in normal times, not pandemic times, there are trade shows for rail industry professionals. And I discovered very quickly that there's one every year, every 2 years in Birmingham, in England. And I have made a point of going to that. This one actually was virtual because this year it was virtual because of the pandemic. But for me, from Paris to get to Birmingham is a very cheap flight, maybe 80 euros round trip, right? Given the 1 hour time difference from England, I can fly out of Paris very early, get to Birmingham. The conference center is 10 minutes by foot from the airport. So I can go and spend a day walking around speaking to rail professionals. The important thing here is that normally I'm not pitching, I'm not selling. I'm never, ever going up to these professionals to say, hi, I'm a translator. Do you need any translations that you're doing? No, on the contrary, I'm getting into their world. I'm asking them about how their technology works. At the last time I was at this Birmingham show, I actually met, if I go down the list, I met the subsidiaries, representatives of subsidiaries of 2 of my French clients, right? I spoke with them about what they were doing in English and French. I met the Chinese National Rail Company and was able to look into what they were doing and ask them questions about how their trains were set up. A Swiss guy explained how door locking mechanisms worked. Railway Gazette International, which is a major publication in the field, was there, and I was able to talk to some of their journalists. I met a British guy who was setting up a training institute for the rail industry, and we talked about professional issues and so on. I was not pitching. I was not selling, but I was immersing myself in their world and understanding better the big picture of why I'm working for the French railways here in France. Also, word of my participation, my attendance at this event, where there were thousands of people, got back to headquarters in Paris, the French railways. People mentioned they'd seen Madame Durban over there, and that reflected well on me as someone who was engaged in their industry. But we've got the pandemic now, so a lot of the in-person trade shows have been shut down. I think I, like many of you, have attended an awful lot of online conferences and panel discussions and that sort of thing. And I think it's also possible to engage with clients in that sort of event. Just want to explain one thing I do. It's a mysterious game I play with myself. I sign up for the type of conferences that interest me, run by the Financial Times, it's a daily business paper, or The Economist or The New Scientist on topics of interest. And very often, the way these things go is you have very prominent speakers. In this particular case, it was the future of news, and I use news a lot as a source. So we had the editor-in-chief of Le Monde and of the Washington Post and of Google Information Systems and so on. And you can ask questions. And so one of the serious games I play is to think about what kind of question I can frame that involves language, involves translation, that would be selected by a panel like this to deal with online as part of their living conference, right? And there's an art to it, because among translators, we talk all the time, but in our own terms. We talk in a way that is not, that doesn't connect necessarily with the bigger picture. And I've learned that practicing, honing my questions, is a way for me to get on the radar screen of these people and then ultimately afterwards engage with them and raise translation issues or make them part of my network. So this is a question that I ask these major editors of major publications. In another example, this is another Financial Times event, Jen Psaki, who was the White House press secretary, was being interviewed by the editor of the Financial Times. And here's a question. I mean, you probably can't read it, but it was a question that Alison Wright, who was a translator in Portugal, was also sitting in and doing the same thing I was. So, bringing language into the questions that these very important people ask, in the hope that they will be thinking more about language and what they do. And in any case, it's interesting to hear what they say. So that's something you can do online, even online, is participate actively, engage, and shape your language so that you can connect with these people. Because talking like the way you do on a translator discussion list will not do it, will not work. Okay? So that's the deal. You have to speak their language and not translator talk. With non-translators, if you talk about MP and PM and use grammar, meta language, and so on, they will not connect. They don't know what you're talking about, right? So you have to reframe things in a way that is actually engaging to them. So you're connecting not just to what you want to say, right, but where their heads are and what will actually impact them. I'm flipping in my presentation now to make sure that I don't get too far behind. All right. Oh, yes. So an important point here is translators spend endless hours squabbling about internal stuff like agencies and freelancers and nobody's fair and this and that. Do not talk about that stuff with clients because they don't care. That immediately puts you to one side as a squabbler, right? As someone who's in their own head and is not out in the client world. All right. I think you should be cautious in naming your other client names because there always are confidentiality issues. Be very cautious. You can criticize other translations maybe, but be careful if you should want to criticize other translators, other suppliers. That's not very classy, right? You should ask questions that demonstrate your awareness of their topic. Not translation stuff. We know you know about translation, but topics that engage and involve them. Okay. Now, I'm very aware that I'm speaking to you, and you're in Ukraine, and here I am in Paris, and I have an English speaker, and the markets are different. So I get that. But one thing that I have noticed is that minority language speakers, no disrespect meant, in fact, it seems to me quite often ignore or downplay the leverage they have by virtue of being a minority. It seems to me a few years ago you had Jonathan Downey speaking here. So he's an interpreter who has an incredibly thick Scottish accent. It's lovely and charming to my American ears, but really not easy to understand for many non-native speakers, all right? I asked Jonathan about that once, like Scottish accent, thick Scottish accent, interpreter booth, how does that work? And he pointed out, quite rightly, that as long as his Scottish accent isn't visible in the French, when he's working in that direction, if he's interpreting for a group of Scottish fishery professionals with French visitors, his accent is actually a plus. It means that his clients there can connect with him better. Clever man, right? That's what you want to see. I have often thought, for example, and I had a recent discussion with a friend in Canada about this, if you have a minority language, of course you should belong to your National Translators Association. I mean, I say that just as that's a principle for me. It's a solidarity thing. But it seems to me you could get a lot of mileage out of joining foreign translator associations, especially ones that require quality and qualifications and so on, because you then become a minority person in the directory of OTIAC or one of the Canadian associations or the French association. And true, there won't be demand every day for what you do, but you will become prominent because you are part of a group that's outside the country. That just seems to me to be a no-brainer, and I'd be very happy to discuss that with you. Okay. So my point here is that you should see the fact that your market may be smaller in some ways as a positive thing, because thanks to the internet, people can find you. People who need you can find you. In a general way, I'm getting very tired of translators who talk about their work as if it were a gig or a hustle, right? As I said before, I'm a professional translator. That's what I do. That's what my profession is. That's what my life is to some extent. And I think that when we start viewing what we do as a long-term effort, as a profession we will be in 10 years' time, that we take it more seriously. Direct impact of this is how much are you prepared to spend to win a client? Right? When I'm working, when I'm courting a new client, like identifying a new client and courting them, it's very clear to me if it's going to be a good match, and I only actively seek out clients that are a good match, that I'm not just looking for them for one job. I'll be working with them probably for 7 or 8 or 9 years, which means being generous up front, offering them little teasers, offering them little free things to start out with, makes good economic sense, right? Because the generosity is an investment in having a client for the long term. There's a lot of talk. I mean, I noticed with some amusement that there are keywords that become very popular from time to time, right? And I'm guilty as charged because I talk a lot about the premium market. But I know that specialization is very important. I'm absolutely, utterly convinced that that is where the action is. Not stupid specialization, of course, but specialization where you actually are doing work to dig in deeply into subjects that are promising, where there's a scope for development. Okay, and I've noticed diversification has now become a thing, probably naturally because of the pandemic. Certain people lost their markets and had to branch out. Okay, again, I would say there's diversification and diversification. Maha will be speaking after me and has some really insightful things to say. For me, not particularly smart specialization would be, diversification would be diversifying into driving Uber. All right, I get it. You need to pay your rent, right? But that, for me, is not an ideal thing. Likewise, linguists, for example, would consider starting to work in transcription, which, as far as I know, pays far less than specialized translation. Okay, you can do it to guide you over, but it's probably not a good career move, all right? So I'm all for diversification into related areas with real, actual training, and you have to keep your eyes open for that. That's a given for me, and I'm happy to talk about this with you later. One thing I have noticed is that people who track the news, translators who track the news, are better oriented, better situated to take advantage of new specialization opportunities. One of our colleagues was very interested in the whole international shipping chain problems that arose with the pandemic. And seeing how important that was, he actually went to Lloyd's of London, the shipping insurers, and did a few certificate courses with them just to get up to speed on the vocabulary in the area. So he can now pitch himself as a specialist in that area. So that's the kind of thing you should be doing. I've included a link here, which you can listen to when you have time. This is David Gemiotti, who works in Switzerland at Banque Cantonale Vaudoise. And he brings this to everyone's attention, that business people who have a poor idea of translation see us as expense and risk, not as solution. And why is that? Well, partly because, as I've seen in my mystery shopper experiments, translators can create risk for businesses when they work in fields that they don't really know enough about, right? Where they're just getting by. Okay? And I recommend listening to his entire talk. You've got the link there. So, moving right along, I think that we should very definitely, this is my recommendation, spend at least half of the professional time you've got, where you're not actually translating, you should spend that in client venues and in clients' heads. What does that mean? It means reading the magazines and the the newspapers and the publications that they read. It means getting out of the house, or getting out online, to be in places where they are, okay? So that you are spending at least as much time in your client environments as you are in translator environments. Yes, here I am actually criticizing translator and interpreter of social media, where I think far too many people spend far too much time. I admire the solidarity. I think it's very good to help people out, right? But it can become the ultimate comfort zone, where you kind of think you're being professional because you're talking to other translators, when in fact it would be much better if you were out speaking to clients, actually to clients. Okay, so that's my experience, and those are some suggestions that I offer you. In a conference last year or the year before, I used this map in a kind of jokey way. I talk about translators living in TranslatorLand. You see, there's translator training land over there too. And it seems to me very few translators actually hop on a boat and get over into client land to see what's going on over there. That's a pity. That really is a pity, because it's daunting. It can seem scary and daunting, and there are lots of ways you could avoid doing it. But if you actually bite the bullet and you actually get out of your house, out of your cave, to go over and see what's going on over there, you'd be amazed at how much more understanding, how many more insights you have as to what you should be doing with the text that you get to translate. In fact, my conviction here is that translators, remember I mentioned ignorance and stupidity? All right, I don't want anyone to quote me here on Twitter or anything, but translators aren't stupid. No, of course not. We're not stupid. But we can be uncomfortable or anxious or kind of show signs of ignorance when it would make good sense to leave our little island and get out in the big world. And just to be clear, here's a long list of language-related jobs, right? And I've highlighted translate because that's what I'm talking about. As I said, the area of translation where translation is a human talent industry, which is booming, which is actually booming. Don't believe the people who tell you that it's purely word replacement or scalable commoditization. That exists, but it's something else, right? If for whatever reason you're not making it as a translator, but by all means go out and look at all these other areas that are related, because there's plenty of scope for work. But if you're a translator, why not consider just how appealing it is, right? To be connecting with clients and bringing them solutions to the challenges that they have. The intellectual pleasure of it, right? But also the financial reward for doing so. You're probably wondering about how our camp went. Well, this is we actually, with my brothers, we actually put the shingles on ourselves, right? And so that is where I will be spending some time in this autumn, if the pandemic, if everything goes well, enjoying watching the leaves turn red and gold. So I'm looking forward to that from my office here in Paris, and thinking about you guys out there in the forest. I'm also thinking about the fact that I imagine you there in Ukraine will be having a party tonight. And this is a party that we had for translators on the deck on the terrace outside of our camp, probably in 2013, 2015, maybe. So I really know that getting together, I'm talking about going out to see clients, right? But getting together with translators is a very interesting and fun way station. So I will be lifting a glass to you from my distant office as you celebrate tonight, I hope, with your friends in the forest. And Nigel Sage and I will be hosting a just Q&A conversation this evening, starting at 8 p.m. your time online, if anybody has any questions about this. I'm absolutely astonished because I seem to have finished with 5 minutes left. My God. So, because those are my remarks as far as it goes. Here you have my contact details if you want to get back to me. And I'm not sure how the Q&A would go, but I'm very happy to answer questions if you would like. Organizers?
Chris, can you hear me? Thank you very much. That was amazing.
You're welcome.
And do we have any questions from the audience? We do. I'm coming.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Chris. Thank you for your
Hello.
presentation. It was amazing. I was just wondering about that linguist sausage producer on the list of the, your specifications. Is that the venue I could get in as well? Because I love sausages as well. Something.
Okay, that was a sarcastic comment made by Kevin Losner, I think. Some of you will know him. He's a MemoQ whiz. And he refers to LSPs as when they're
Is this
not.
good, Alexander? Can you see it on the screen?
Can you see it?
So I have just shared my presentation.
Oops, I don't know if you can hear me.
Probably it
I'm
was
hearing
Maha.
you.
Maha, hello. We are very glad to hear you, but not yet.
Okay. Anyway, LSP was a joke because for Kevin Losner, LSP is not necessarily language service provider, but language sausage producer or whatever, where companies take a job and they cut it into slices and they give a slice to each person and then they try to put it back together and it doesn't look very good at the end. It was a joke. Sorry.
I see. Thank you.
Any other questions?
And have we any questions from the audience? More questions? No, thank you. We don't have any questions from the online audience yet. So,
Chris, thank you very much. It was very nice to
Well,
see you
thank you.
again. And we do not have any other questions from the audience and from our online audience. But if we do, we will transfer them to you. Thank you very much for being with us this morning.
Okay, and see you tonight. Okay, bye-bye.